Okay, will this be a podcast that I record every time on my bed? I don't know. I guess we'll see. So, weirdly enough, I am recording this one before I even record and post episode two because this is episode three, and this is going to be about the deaf episode from Queer Eye. And what I really have never, honestly, I have never even thought about this, but is like the school for the deaf or the school for the blind inclusive? I say all the time that non-public schools are not inclusive. Those are segregated schools, and that's not what we want. But what kind of like what's the difference of that we are categorizing or not categorizing, we're like grouping together a group of people based off of their disability. And the coach Denton had a few lines that I just would really like to talk about. So I took some notes. Let's see. First, culture. I don't think you can talk about the deaf community without talking about the deaf culture because there is deaf pride. And I learned sign language in high school, which was like early 2000s. Well, whatever. And then I did a sign language class in college that had a deaf teacher, and I got close to her. And then afterwards, I worked with California Deafblind Services and Helen Keller National Center. So I've been working with a lot of deafblind, and people who are blind, the community. So I've talked to a lot of them. We've had conversations about this, but we've never had conversations about, is this an inclusive choice or is that what they want? How I was first described this is that there are people who are capital D deaf and lowercase d deaf. Capital D deaf meant that being deaf was a part of their identity, and they didn't want cochlear implants. They don't want to be expected to just fit into the hearing world. That they are proud of who they are. They are deaf, and they don't want to change that. And then, I mean, really, because of the ableism, really starting in the medical field when people get their first diagnoses, what they said in this episode was that a lot of doctors encourage parents to teach their children to lip read, put them in speech so they can learn how to use their voice, and put them into schools that are not just for deaf students. And it's interesting because this whole episode is about this coach who is really like, he talked about how the student population at their school has just super decreased. And it was like 300 students, and now they're down to like 90 students. And it was kind of interesting because, as a person who focuses on being included in your chosen community, if a person wants to go to a school that's not just for deaf students, I mean, then that's their choice. But how do you get an unbiased choice if you are a deaf child with two hearing parents? What are the hearing parents really going to suggest? Which just brings me to so many topics. So, first, something that the coach said about his parents, and this is what I think is really important and why I think deaf schools and schools for the blind are still here. Because Denton said that he, loves his parents. They have such a great relationship. They've always been supportive. The second they learned he was deaf, they learned American Sign Language, and but Denton went to a camp with other deaf children, and after connecting with them, he walked away from it just, knowing like, my parents will never truly know what it's like to be deaf. And that will never go away. That with any disability, no one ever knows what someone else is really going through, what challenges they have to face, and what accommodations have to be made. And our world is not an inclusive world. Like we're not equipped. No, I don't even want to say equipped. We are equipped. We just don't know how to use it to support all these differences that are out there, all these disabilities that are out there. Um, so yeah, so okay, I'm going off track. Uh, so I mean, it's just like it's just a good reminder of someone with a disability, whether deaf, being blind, having a physical disability, having whatever disability, that is changing how they access the world. And a lot of people feel less than when it is a challenge to access the world. But I think what the real problem is the people who are in charge of these changes, not making it accommodating, not making it, not learning from our community. So in this area, it's like, okay, well, we have a lot of deaf students. How can we make sure that if they want to go to their neighborhood school, they have the option to have interpreters and they have options to, the kind of support and accommodations they need. This also kind of reminded me of that commercial. I mean, because I think what Denton said at the end was belonging, that he feels like he belongs at the school. And I mean, everybody wants a sense of belonging in their community. And it made me think of that commercial of the deaf man who was he was just like walking around his neighborhood, and then people kept signing to him, and he was shocked. He just kept looking around like, did they just sign to me? Did they sign to me? And it was like an AT&T commercial about communication. And like how happy he was. And like, everyone, it's like, it was like a pulling at the heartstrings commercial, but it's kind of interesting because that's like basic communication. Like, why is it so hard? Like, why aren't we as a society okay with like figuring out things? Figuring out like if a deaf person comes up and wants to order food, like how can that be accommodated? How can we, have like a menu that they can point to? Or I mean, I know technology today, there's so many easy accommodations that people can just like have on their phone. Oh my gosh, don't delete my notes. So just the importance of like finding accommodations for everybody, blah, blah, blah. So I also want to talk about, so a kind of, I guess, a pro for schools that are specific for students who are deaf or blind, is that these students might be getting connected to their first mentor. And so the scene where this one of the students was telling the coach how much he loves him, and he's just like can barely hold in the emotions, just crying, very very moving scene. But to my first thought was like, he might be that student, the coach might be that student's first deaf mentor. And just like what Denton said about his parents, no matter how supportive they are, they'll never know the challenges that he had to face of being deaf. These he it is really important to find mentors and to find people that you can connect with to figure out, how do we make these changes? How do we find solutions? How do we make the world more inclusive so people can feel like they belong in their community? So I guess what I'm saying, I mean, it does feel like schools for specific disabilities, I mean, it's not inclusive, unless everybody had the right to go there. And this, I guess I actually don't know. Do you have to be deaf or hard of hearing to go to a school for the deaf? Because Oh, if yeah, yeah. So I don't know that, and and I guess how do we find a middle ground here? Like those schools are not inclusive, and I don't know if they're going to be able to keep going because I kind of feel like we are leaning towards an inclusive world. And I think it's important that people of all abilities be able to be mixed together because that's what our community is. So it just makes me think that, like, of course, I'm not saying deaf people have to learn how to lip read and how to speak with, like, verbally, or how to, like, I'm not saying I think deaf people need to just pretend like they're hearing people, but I do think the next step is, how do we all go to school together? How do we all go to school in our neighborhood schools with the proper accommodations? But then still being able to find people that have the same kind of identity. I mean, that's anybody. I mean, not even like disabilities. I mean, right now, my newest identity in the last few years has been becoming a mom. And I have basically just joined a bunch of groups learning how to um, befriending other moms, because we connect on this really big identity that is just really important to us. It doesn't mean that I am only friends with moms, but that is part of my identity. Um, which, is just helpful when you're feeling really stressed out and having challenges that moms have, to connect with people like that. So I also really like the quote that they had I could not tell you who said it because I was trying to write it down really quick. It said, deaf people can do anything a hearing person can do except hear, which I love because that is definitely like the anti-ableist phrase. Because I mean, being ableist would be saying that you are less than because you're deaf, which is obviously not true, but sadly, things that people feel, as doctors' recommendations to parents who get children who are newly deaf is usually, you know, get them as close to the hearing world as possible because that's how they're going to be successful. And that's just not a good way for anybody to, like, really live a life. So, so I just want to finish this by saying this has just been my opinion as an inclusion specialist, former special education teacher, former worker in the blind field. Um, and I would just really love your opinion because this is something I've never really thought about. And it is important that we all feel like we belong. And so when people ask me what my definition for inclusion is, I say that it's being included in your chosen community. So I obviously am never going to force people to be included in, like, their neighborhood school. If they don't want to be, they don't want to be. But it's important that they get all the information to be able to make that educated choice. Because, if you are deaf and if you're choosing between a school for the deaf and not a school that's not for the deaf, can that school provide you interpreters? Or do they have groups maybe with other deaf students that you can join and connect with? Oh, and I also, I mean, this is kind of off the topic here, uh, but I did make a comment to my partner, and I just feel like it's important to say that, because it's a football team, and my first thought was like, well, none of those parents care about their kids' heads because they're letting them play football. And that is like a weird, I don't know why, I don't know if it was all the studies it was probably all the studies that came out, that I was just like, okay, I'm going to now share just a quick story and then I swear I'm going to be done. So my first child is a girl, and someone said, I was saying something about like being inclusive, or we're not like pushing gender roles on her. She's, 3. And someone was like, oh, so you'd let her play football if she wanted to? And my response was, no, I don't care if they're a boy or a girl or whatever, I am gonna very, very much encourage we do not play football or any sports that are really like head focused. Got to protect that noggin, everybody. Anyways, but that's a totally other topic. I mean, it's a pretty short topic. That's like my whole opinion on it. But whatever. Do whatever you want. You want to play football, go play football. I don't care. Just like don't force me to do it. Okay. Well, inclusion starts now. That is it. Episode 3. Thanks for listening. And again, I'd love to hear your opinions. Comment. Go to any of my social media stuff. Inclusion Starts Now is everywhere. And let's keep this conversation going because I think this is something really interesting and I really have never thought about this before. So again, I love your opinion. Have a great day. Inclusion starts with you and I just want to help. Bye.